Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this first FR Panorama episode of 2024. This is the seventh in our ongoing webinar series. I'm Larry Liberti, and as always, here with my colleague, Dr. Mario Alanis. We'll be your host today for our session as we look into the topic of good submission practices. Hello, Mario.
Hello, Larry. How are you
How's
doing?
Very
Great to
good.
see you again.
How are things in Mexico?
Things are very well. A little dark still. It's but great, and looking forward for this program.
Well, Mario, since the start of this program in January 2023, an average of 350 colleagues from around the world have been registering for these informative webinars. And as with the past webinars, our registrants today are from all over the world. They represent a global community from the pharmaceutical industry, from regulatory agencies, from universities and trade associations, from essentially every continent, probably except Antarctica. This webinar series was created to help stakeholders get an understanding of how to implement and refine or just consider the use of what we call facilitated regulatory pathways. And FR Panorama is an educational program of the Erudi Foundation. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization which is the sponsor of the FR Path project. And we encourage you to go to the frpath.org website to learn more about these pathways. We're also most grateful for the ongoing support provided by MSD for the FR Panorama series. So the input and guidance from our advisory committee, topic experts, and past participants continually help us to shape the content of these informative and what we think are practical webinars. As a reminder, all our prior webinars are archived on the frpath.org website, so you can access them very easily there. It's our sincere hope that by participating in these webinars, you'll get practical insights to address your questions about the topic. Tell me about good submission practices. But before we explore our topics for today, I just want to introduce you to my co-host again, Mario Alanis.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Larry. It's always great to participate in these webinars. And today we have a fascinating group of colleagues who are here to share their experiences. I know that it's sometimes difficult to determine what are the difficulties and resistances within an organization to use reliance pathways. However, our speakers, each one in their different roles, have personal experience about these challenges, and I'm sure they will guide us and teach us of practical ways to move reliance forward. So, Larry, let's get started.
Okay, thanks, Mario. As always, today our session will last about 1 hour, and we hope that you'll find it to be an excellent use of your time. Please feel free to suggest questions. There is a chat box that you can put your questions and comments in, and Mario and I will do our best to monitor this and to pose the questions to our guests, and as we talk about these topics during our roundtable. As I mentioned, today we're going to deep dive into the topic of how to optimize the benefits of good submission practices. And, as agencies and companies seek to simplify and facilitate the submission process, we thought it would be helpful to provide insights into the submission best practices with some practical examples of how to avoid some common pitfalls, how to address regional submission differences, and just other topics that you might be thinking about with regard to how do we align submissions of regulatory documents. Before we introduce our speakers, we'd like to share the results to date of the 2-question survey that we asked you to complete to get some insights into what you think about this topic. Just to say that if you have not completed the survey yet, we will be posting the link in the chat. It's an ongoing survey. Please go in. It takes 30 seconds to complete. You'll see the link here, but it's also in the chat. So the first question was, do you feel that the regulatory requirements needed to comply with a marketing authorization application that uses Reliance are, and there were four options, consistent and well aligned across regulatory agencies in my region. And 10% of the respondents said that. We think generally aligned, but are subject to special requests by each agency. About a third, 30% people responded. But interestingly enough, about 60% said to some degree, these requirements are not aligned. They require a prioritization as to which agencies to submit for. So when you're thinking about submission practices, you're going to have to scale these. And some even said they're not aligned, which severely limits the use of these reliance pathways.
Wow.
Next slide. I'm sorry, I just need to get this going. Then we asked participants to look at these different aspects of good submission practices. Now, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC group, have a number of guidelines and activities around good submission practices. And we took some of the things that they say are important with regard to good submission practices, and we asked you to rank their importance. So a 1 is the highest rank, and you can see that this is an aggregate then. So the average of all of these represents in the position of this particular topic. So the availability of and compliance with up-to-date regulatory requirements was considered number 1. Very important to be clear about what is it that the agency expects and how can the company actually meet those expectations in their submissions. And secondly, having a well-structured submission dossier with a plan for the submission process. In other words, interacting with the agency, understanding what their expectations are, and putting the dossier together in a way that will meet the need of the agency are critically important. What I thought was interesting is down below, the use of effective and efficient communications between the sponsor and review authority. I would have actually expected that to be number 1 because that reduces or improves the expectations so that everybody's on the same page. So I think we have some learnings here about what to expect, how we can maybe approach submissions. So with that, I'd like to jump right in and talk about the 3 unique points of view we're going to be hearing today. First, we'll be hearing from Fanny Carrillo, the supervisor of the medical team at the Dirección Nacional de Medicamentos in El Salvador. And she'll be talking about submission alignment and how it can help the regulatory reliance process. We're expecting Marie Valentine from the World Health Organization. She's had some difficulty joining. We'll see if she can join in time. And we're very pleased to have Tatiana Gapan, the Executive Director of Chemistry Manufacturing Controls Strategy and Portfolio Management at MSD USA. And she'll be talking about some challenges with complying with submission requirement diversity. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mario to introduce our first speaker. Mario, over to you.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, and it's very interesting, the results of the survey, and particularly as they are related to the topics we're going to talk about. It's great. Well, first, the first speaker that I'm going to introduce, we are honored to have here Fanny Carrillo. She is a pediatrician with rich background in public and private healthcare, and she is the current medical supervisor at the Drug Registry Unit of the National Drug Agency of El Salvador. And I think it's very good, particularly because El Salvador is one of the agencies that has been more successful in implementing reliance in Latin America. So it will be very interesting to hear from her. She's responsible for overseeing the whole registration process, ensuring compliance with standards, and fostering collaboration with other teams. Uh, this experience has enriched her understanding of the meticulous regulatory process and the importance of good practices. So with this background, Fanny, I welcome you, and the floor is yours. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Mario. It's a really pleasure to be here. Thank you. So, in behalf of the topic, I think it's important to talk a little bit about implementing reliance practice in El Salvador from the perspective of the National Regulatory Agency of El Salvador. So, first, I want to show you some slides about the results of the response time improvement index. As you can see, at the beginning of the process in 2021, the response was really low. And when we start applying reliance, the time and response, it was showing an improvement. We start with 74%. And even if we have 84%, 85% in some months, but if you want to see the response time improvement according of working days, you can see that it's really remarkable. We have response in 2021 of 30 days. And then when we start applying reliance, that response time is really, really short. It's even 3.5 days of response. And these achievements, I think it's important to remarkable. And it is important to know that reliance is a good tool to improve. For us, what are the strategies? Well, first, we have to implement foreign recognition of countries that have high surveillance and maturity in topic of reliance. We are quitting requirements that delay the granting of registration without ignoring or reviewing surveillance mechanisms. We are updating of technical reviews guidelines for granting of registration. We are training all the people that it's working with us, and also we are training the regulated part. So it's one-to-one, and sometimes we are enable reviewing lines for simplified procedures and making everything more smooth. We're establishing an open channel of communication with the regulated. I saw that that was one of the topics of the survey. So for us, this is important. Establish an open channel to communicate with all, to be in the same page. What will be the registration process? Well, it's going to start with submit the application. We are going to verify the requirements. If the requirements are okay, we are going to admit the application. And based on competency, we are going to assign the process. It's going to be on the review, and it's going to be on a technical opinion. And if everything is good, we are going to obtain and give you a licensing. If it's not good, we are going to emit an observation, and the regulated part has 10 days to submit the corrections. It's going to be a committee to review again the information. It's going to, if everything is good, we are going to receive a technical opinion, and we are going to receive once again a license. If the process is not good, the committee is going to finally decide to put down that procedure and archiving the procedure. So it's not going to be able to continue the register process. So it's going to be finalizing in this step. Why is it's important to have everything in order and complete? Because when we are applying reliance, it's important to let you know that we have faster response times, enhanced ability on access to medicines and sanitary products. Limit SARS are optimizing by avoiding duplicating tasks, and improving focus on regulatory priorities thanks to more efficient reviewing process. But remember, reliance is the concept by which regulatory agency considers and gives significant weight to assessment made by another regulatory agencies, but also has the authority to review and put all the requirements that they think there are applicable to every country. The authority that relies on the assessment and information of others remains independent and responsible at the end for his final decision. Even if it's based on assessment and information of others, it can be approval or denying the registry of the drug, of the medicines, of the natural health products. So it's important to take note for this part. Also, reliance is not a lesser way of regulatory supervision. It's a strategy for better use of available resources in any environment. So um, it's not going to be less important to or easier in the way that you are not required to submit everything. You are required to submit all the documents that the National Regulatory Agency asks you. But you know that this is a strategy to both ways to be a better use of the available resources. In the reliances principles, what we are looking for consistency. One of the more important things, sovereignty of the decision making. We are looking for transparency, legal basis, and competence. What are the qualities that the national regulatory agencies are showing you is that this process is going to be transparent, reliable, competent, and consistent. And for us in El Salvador, we are under the law, on the Decree 34, and this says that it applies the registration from regulatory agency level 4. So you are seeing some example over here of which regulatory agency we are taking in count. And also for us, it says that biological and biotechnological products are recognized only when these specific national regulatory agencies, and even if you are trying to import another product, the time of response is going to be 10 business days. We are making a big effort to give you a response or a quick note to let you know of the process by email. And you are going to have a response, I think, for an average of 5 days. So that is really good. And for the part of mutual recognition that I saw that you already talked in previous forums, for us is under the resolution 446 for the 2021. And the recognition applies to the health registration of medicines organization from Paris states. We have a list of these. At the same, biologicals and biotechnological products, natural health products, natural products, and homeopathic products are excluded. And the response is going to be 10 business days. I am happy to say that for this path right now, the time of response is really short. It's like 2.5 days. So it's a really good one. And in the reliance through all regulatory agency, what we are looking for, what we are trying to make, it's so the registration, commercialization, authorization, making the surveillance and control, making also regulatory inspection, reviewing clinical trials, making also health surveillance in hospitals and clinic, licensing establishments for able to sell and produce products, making also quality control, and reviewing the batch of release of all the products that we approve. So as we see, there is no one easy or short activity that we're not doing. We are trying to be under control of everything that you see and more of you see in this slide. So that's why it's important to use the correct channels to try to use the resources that we have in the better way. What are other practices that we adopt? GMP. certificates from other countries are recognized and accepted. We have a memorandum of understanding signed by collaborating with other national regulatory agencies in the area and also in Europe. We have a committee of Central American National Regulatory Agency directors is promoted in order to gain and develop regulatory trust. What type of documents are requests from regulatory agencies? Each one is different, but at the date for us does not directly ask for documentations to other national regulatory agency of reference. We show or we compare the documentation that we receive with public information, often obtained for the official website of other national regulatory agencies. We consider that access to national regulatory agencies' assessment reports will be a key element to better know the decision-making process and to increase the trust, but also know that some of the information that are reviewing it's confidential, so we understand that it's not going to be public. In this case, well, reliance can be facilitated by mutual agreement on information exchange to guarantee uniformity of evaluated programs in required that manufacturer present in the application of the same documentation that it's used in the application of everyone in the National Regulatory Agency. How often are they being used for risk-based decision making? Well, during COVID, this was really important. It was the main topic, and right now, still during public health, we use reliance to give timeline and effective responses. We take into consideration if the product also is an emergency, or we are not having more of this kind of product in the country, and we need it. If we have enough in the pharmacies, we're reviewing how often it is used or how many patients they need it. And sometimes it's very often during evaluation process of market authorization review, including sanitary registrations and special import authorization. We take consideration decision from this part. Do non-public document help agencies? Yes. Well, not public documents can be great value for us and for every agency. It's going to be in some points benefit. These documents are going to give us an holistic understanding of the products. So this part is really important to us, and we are looking for of this part. It's going to be working in the reliance process for all the national regulatory agencies in the world. If is missing information for public documentation, that could be of value in provided. Yes, public documents often omit valuable or even essential information. And we know that we are trying to have a good channel of communication with other national regulatory agency to review or know specific data about clinical trials, previous quality problem with the product, or another details of the formula, another details of the proceed, or another details of the whole procedure itself. What are the challenges that we are looking? Well, it's important to promote the importance of trust, increase the credibility as a regulatory agency, promote meetings and strategic alliances between agencies and health industry, modernize technology spaces to favor transparency and exchange of information, establish reasonable requirements of the process, have control in place to ensure the proper application of the process, apply the same criteria to all type of medical products, and standardize the process of reliance. We really, in the National Regulatory Agency of El Salvador, we are really happy with the process of reliance. We cherish that process, and we are one, as Mario said, one of the ones that we really trust in the process of reliance. And since we are really a small country, we are happy to have the opportunity to make reliance in the process of registration. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Fanny. We have some questions, and I think what we'll do is we'll just wait until we get to the panel, because you've presented beautifully about the success of how this works. And I think there are some questions about how you actually did it, because there have been challenges, and how do good submission practices facilitate all of this? So we'll come back to you in just a little while, okay? Very good. Well, when I think about initiatives to help align registration practices, I think of the great work that our colleagues are undertaking at the World Health Organization. And we're happy to have here Marie Valentine, who has been spending much of her time focusing on the alignment of good regulatory practices, and more specifically to our theme, good registration and good submission practices. Marie is the WHO team lead for a variety of activities involving good registration practices. And Marie, thank you very much for joining us from Europe. We definitely have a multi-national group of people here, and we'll turn it over to you, Marie, okay?
You're muted, Marie. No?
Yeah.
You're muted.
Okay. So Marie, I think what we'll do, if you go out and come back in again. In the meantime,
can you hear me now?
There
Yes,
you are.
now.
You're
Perfect.
wonderful, loud and clear.
Apologies.
Excellent. All yours.
Good. We are stronger than computers. We always have to remember that. Doesn't feel like this, but thanks so much for the invitation. I suppose, will you be able to put my slides up? Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizer, and good day to you all. Yes, so my name is Marie Valentine. I'm the team lead for the team Facilitated Product Introduction at WHO headquarters in Geneva. And we work with all the reliance mechanism to facilitate introduction of products, such as the WHO collaborative registration procedure, and all the global health procedure, and the joint assessment. So today we've been discussing, and it was very nice to hear the regulators from Salvador talking about trust and reliance, because also on our side we promote very much the reliance concept and the work sharing between regulators. Next slide, please. So for today, what we're going to look at is the medical products regulatory landscape, how to improve submissions and review, and have a few words about the good regulatory practices. So we know that for the oversight and to ensure access to quality, effective, and safe medical products, we need strong regulatory systems. But we also need this regulatory system to work in collaboration and use reliance. And we need to have a reliable submission for this marketing authorization for medical products. We know that there's a variety of maturity level currently. So if we look at the global situation and the landscape, most of the national regulatory authorities have not reached a stable maturity level 3, as per the WHO global benchmarking tool. So most 70% of the member states are still working towards building a stable maturity level. So we have to try to work towards increasing access to quality products in all these countries. The regulators and manufacturers across the globe are facing increasing challenges and workload. We know that the workload is increasing, and we know that there is a complexity due to the globalization of market and the complex supply chains. We know that the resources are limited, the financial, technical, and human resources. So really, as a global regulatory community, we have to make the best use of resources. We have to use reliance, and we have to try to improve efficiency of the regulatory oversight. We want to promote transparency and high-quality submission and decision. And here with this slide, also wanted to show that we're all working towards the same goal, being manufacturers or regulators, to serve patients and to make sure that they can have access to the quality medical product that they need. So how can we improve marketing authorization submission and decision? And you can see that on one side, we've put the manufacturers, and on the other side, we've put the regulators. But literally, a lot of the actions that can be taken are the same from the side of the manufacturer and the side of the regulators. So when we look at using and following international standards, such as WHO, ICH, so this is for both manufacturer and regulators, promoting transparency. So for the manufacturer, promoting transparency in terms of making sure that the application contains all the information, all the clinical studies, for example, even if some of the results were not the one that was expected, and to be transparent in terms of the data package. For the regulators, to be transparent in terms of their processes, to process the marketing authorization application, and also transparency in terms of their assessments. So we promote as much as possible publication of assessment report, evaluation reports that explain the decision making. For the manufacturer, it's very important to comply with the legal and regulatory framework from the countries that they are planning to submit in and follow the national guideline. So it's very important if you see maybe the legal framework as a mountain, and then the guidelines are the ropes that help you navigate this legal framework. We encourage also manufacturers to have early dialogue with regulators, to use existing tools such as scientific advice, any additional regulatory support that is offered by the regulators, and any fast-track procedures. Analysis has shown that when a manufacturer or an applicant follows scientific advice, there is a better outcome in terms of the decision for that specific application. And for both, again, we encourage the use of the good regulatory and good reliance practices. So I'm glad that the regulators from Salvador was mentioning trust and reliance. For the regulators, we advocate in terms of transparency, as well as in case there is any change in legislation or some new guideline, to have a process with consultation with the stakeholders, because they are the users of this procedure, they are the users of these guidelines. So it's very important to consult and to hear from the users what would be the best way to implement, for example, a new legislation or a new guideline. We encourage regulators to offer platform for interaction with applicants, and we encourage international collaboration. I wanted to bring up this document. This is not a new document. It's not so new, because you can see it was published in 2015. However, it still brings a lot of very important aspects in terms of good review practices. So this WHO Good Review Practices was developed in partnership with the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, the APEC. And here, for example, we've got 10 very high-level principles for good review practices. So one is that the review should be balanced. So it should be objective and unbiased. It should consider the context. So the data, the conclusion should be seen in the context of the condition of use and the storage of the product. It should be evidence-based. So it should reflect both scientific and regulatory state of art as much as possible. It should identify signals. So from the data that are in the application, it should highlight potential areas of concern identified by the applicants and by the reviewers. It should investigate and solve problems. So we can have some analysis of the key scientific data. We should have a problem-solving attitude and flexibility. It should be risk-based, and the review should synthesize all this data and recommend solution and alternative where necessary. The review should make linkages so that means that all the different aspects, so the quality, safety, efficacy data, they should all be linked together. They should also ensure timely communication and consultation with all stakeholders. So, for example, the applicants that have submitted the application, but also to tap in or to refer or to use additional expertise if needed. So if in the review of the application, it is felt that some extra expertise is needed, the regulator should potentially consult this additional expertise. It should be thorough, so it should be adequate and follow through all the issues. We should use critical analysis, so in terms of what is the scientific integrity, what is the relevance and the completeness of the data, and what is the proposed labeling. So how is the proposed labeling supported by the safety, efficacy, and quality data that have been submitted? The review should be well documented, should be well written, thorough reports, evidence-based, and give some succinct recommendation. And finally, last but not least, it should be well managed. So this refers to the project management and also to the quality management system. So to make sure that there is a defined process and clearly defined steps so that the applicants and the users, they know what to expect. And here also I've put a little flowchart that is in this good review practice and that explain that you have to always work on improvements of your processes, and you should have a record of what has been done and to try to have this cycle of improvements and further amelioration of the processes. Now I'm going to move to the WHO Good Regulatory Practices. This document was published in March 2021. It came as a response to requests for guidance in addressing common gaps that were seen in the benchmarking, so in the evaluation of the regulatory system. So there were some common gaps in the regulatory practices that were identified during this benchmarking. And the idea there was to give some guidance on some high-level principle to help regulators improve their regulatory system. So it's a set of principles and practices applied to the development, implementation, and review of regulatory instruments in order to have a better regulatory oversight in a most efficient way. It's very important to highlight that it's relevant to all regulators. So regardless the level of maturity, regardless the level of resources, it's very important for all regulators to apply and to look at these good regulatory practices. What are the 9 novel principles? And I won't go in detail, but I'm just going to name them. So there is legality, consistency, independence, impartiality, proportionality, flexibility, clarity, efficiency, and transparency. So we've talked about transparency already in a lot of our discussion in terms of the importance of being transparent from the regulator side, but also from the manufacturer side. This is just to give you an example. I won't go through all the principles, but it's to show that all these principles from the good regulatory practices, they are linked to the global benchmarking tool. So the global benchmarking tool is the tool that is used by WHO and member states to assess the national regulatory system. It's a series of 260 indicators for the 9 different regulatory functions. And all these good regulatory practices, they are linked to indicators in the GPT. So as we mentioned, because the gaps, they came from doing the benchmarking. So it's very important for this guidance to be linked to the source, and the source is the global benchmarking tool. So in terms of legality, for example, it is linked, and I've taken the example of marketing authorization in terms of the requirements for the function of marketing authorization, in terms of the legal provision for marketing authorization, etc. So just to show that these good regulatory practices, they are closely linked to the global benchmarking tool that is used by WHO and member states. This one is the last slide, and this is a flowchart that is taken from the good regulatory practices, is to show that these good regulatory practices principle, they are not coming in isolation, and the regulatory community has identified some good regulatory practice enablers that facilitate the implementation of these good regulatory practices. And the enablers, as you can see, are political and governmental support, good organization, governance, and leadership, effective communication, collaboration, and coordination. And this is very important because in some national regulatory system, it might be different institutions responsible for different aspects of the regulatory oversight. So it's very important to have effective communication, collaboration, and coordination between the different institutions. There should be also a robust and well-functioning quality management system. So we've seen also in terms of good submission and good review, we have to have a good quality management system, sufficient and sustainable financial resources, competent human resources, and preset organizational ethic and values. So it's very important to already have maybe a code of conduct, an ethical code for the regulatory authorities. And last, all the decisions should be science and data driven in order to be clear in terms of how did they make their decision and what is the scientific rationale behind the decision. Here, I won't go into data, but it's just to show that the regulatory system, as I mentioned, might be composed of several institutions, but it's also composed of the regulatory framework and the resources that are available for these regulatory authorities to perform the regulatory function. That will allow to have some regulatory outputs, for example, inspection, assessment reports, regulatory decision, and to have a final outcome in terms of compliance with the regulatory the regulatory requirements. And then finally, to have an impact, because this is what allows to improve access to safe, effective, and assured quality medical products. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I will be very happy to take any question. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Marie. It's been very, very interesting, and it's fascinating to see consistency with the good regulatory practices, good review practices, with some of the experience that El Salvador has shared. It's although it's 2015, that document of good review, I think it's very, very important. It doesn't need any change. Well, we have heard from a global institution like World Health Organization. We have heard from a regulatory agency. And it's been fascinating and very consistent, but now it would be very important to hear from a private company, a pharmaceutical company. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tatiana Gaban from MSD USA. Pharmaceutical companies are making their products, they want to make their products widely available. And so they make, I'm sure they make a big effort to comply with the best submission practices, avoid inconsistencies. So today we have asked Tatiana to share with us her experience with these issues. And welcome, Tatiana.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Larry, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here to exchange some ideas about regulatory optimization and best practices in the submission area. And I'm very happy here to follow the great presentations from Fanny and Marie as well, who shared great examples as well as of the best practice as part of the regulatory systems. So my contribution today is going to be for the topic about the challenges to complying with submission requirement diversity. Apologies for my muffled voice today. Seasonal allergies are already hitting here in the US, but I hope you can hear me well during my presentation. So let me move the slides in here. So just to start us off, just a bit of a background. My presentation today will be more focused on manufacturing changes and post-approval aspects, but most of the concepts can be also translated into other regulatory areas as well. So the management of global manufacturing regulatory submissions involves a complex web of processes, right, and stakeholders to ensure the availability and quality of medications worldwide. Manufacturing changes, they aim to improve the quality, efficiency, or cost effectiveness of producing medicines, and implementing these changes in an effective effective and lean manner is key to ensure patient access in a quicker manner, and also with the latest processes, quality and capacity enhancements of the manufacturing. Um, Pharmaceutical manufacturing processes are also tightly regulated, right, by the various authorities around the globe, and may require regulatory clearance to be implemented, which can add time and complexity to the process, especially when requirements are so divergent across the countries. As you can see in this slide in here, typically companies start the regulatory processes to approve manufacturing changes by developing a core quality dossier. But then, due to the various different requirements across the globe, many different versions of the original dossier are generated to meet each national requirement. This by itself can generate delays in submissions due to the intense internal work in the industry to gather and develop the new data and documents. And while the change is already submitted, for instance, in the US and EU, it can take several months to get the same change submitted in all impacted markets by that specific change. In addition, the lack of predictability sometimes of the review timelines also bring complexities to implement the manufacturing changes. For instance, a major change in the EU that would take around like 90 days for review and approval could take several months or even years to be approved globally, causing then this complex inventory management, risk of drug shortages in the case of the old inventory is exhausted before the approval of the new setup, and also delays in access to medicines and vaccines with the latest process quality and capacity enhancements. So in summary, for this first slide in here, the need for regulatory convergence and application of reliance mechanisms is critical to simplify the process to implement global changes and to ensure that the patients are getting the quality products in their countries in a reasonable time frame. So it's really good to hear, as I mentioned before, from Fanny and Marie, those good practices on applying reliances and this best practice to simplify this process. So I'm sharing here in this slide some examples of national requirements that are usually beyond what is considered as part of a core quality dossier. Some examples here, like raw data relative to all sites involved in the manufacturing process, including stability sites. Additional analytical validation, in this case here, is not only related to generate documents, but also involves going back to the manufacturing sites, creating and generating new data for the dossiers. Drug product stability data required for drug substances, national GMP inspections and certifications, manufacturing site registrations of sites that were inspected already by other health authorities, and sometimes there is no leverage of like the inspection results from these other health authorities, not like the mutual recognition is not necessarily applied. Um, Sometimes there's a requirement for providing signed and date drug substance and drug product specifications, copies of monographs, detailed lists of equipments involved in the manufacturing processes, comparative tables with detailed from to information about the change. So the information is present in the dossier, but there's a need to develop an additional document is explaining about like what was the specific changes that are done in the process. In additional declarations, right, with information already provided in other parts of the dossier. So sometimes we see some duplication of information across the dossier in a format of specific declarations that sometimes needs to be signed and dated as well. So by needing to comply with all these additional and very specific information at the submission, the industry has to establish processes, right, and systems to manage these additional demands. So a significant workforce in the industry is usually dedicated to generate and maintain additional and country-specific documentation. Additionally, the lifecycle management of these various versions of the quality dossier is very complex, and industry is continually trying to reduce the dossier version proliferation by having different strategies internally to alter and to manage the proliferation of the documentation. And ultimately, all this additional documentation and customization generates or may generate delays, right, in rolling out the global submissions. And in the end, the ripple effect of this regulatory complexity affects the speed to provide to patients medicines and vaccines with the latest process. So that's why it's critical for us to get the most simplest process possible in here to simplify this complexity. Another critical point to consider to optimize regulatory practices and have a direct benefit to patients globally is to have increased convergence of regulatory pathways and consequently more predictability of the review timelines. So in the left side of the slide, you see a summary of the existing reporting categories from the WHO and the EMEA. And the different suggested review times depending on the potential risks of the change to product quality. So these categories, they range from major changes that have a significant impact on quality, safety, or efficacy of a medicine to changes with no impact, right? So you range on these types of changes. The reportability of these changes to the health authorities also vary, right? So depending on the impact. So while certain changes are considered to have sufficient risk to require a health authority review and approval prior to the implementation and require detailed regulatory submissions and very detailed dossiers, some more moderate to low risk changes are considered not to require prior approval sometimes and generally require less information to support the change. These changes are notified to the health authorities within a defined period of time, either before or after the implementation. So those are the so-called tell, wait, and do and tell type of changes. When we look into the global regulatory scenario, many countries do not have this mechanism to submit changes in a do and tell, wait, and do manner. These filing pathways, they do not exist as part of their regulatory frameworks. Consequently, changes submitted in the EU or in US, for example, as minor, are submitted globally through standard pathways, often requiring more data than necessary to scientifically support the change and have an extended review timelines. So the alignment of the submission pathways with the model used by the WHO and EMEA could significantly improve predictability of health authority expectations and approval timelines when you see submissions going in a global setting, right? So that's our perspectives when you're sitting in an industry that we have like products registered across the globe, and we have to promote and implement those manufacturing changes that are coming. So those are critical aspects for us to ensure that these changes are coming in a faster and in a leaner framework and timeline for the countries and to the patients. Okay. So in conclusion, there are clear opportunities, right, to improve the regulatory efficiencies and ensure quicker global change control, change submissions, rollouts, and enhance the patient's access to medicines. So as kind of a summary here, one approach is by harmonizing the requirements and timelines across the countries. This can be achieved by reducing country-specific requirements and categorizing post-approval changes types based on guidelines. As I mentioned right before, from regulatory bodies like the EMEA or the framework provided by the WHO. And also by doing so, the regulatory processes can be streamlined and more consistent on a global perspective. Another venue for improvement is to use reliance pathways globally, particularly for post-approval changes. And I was glad to hear today from Fanny and Marie the undergoing successes in adoption of reliant pathways from regulators and across the globe. And along these lines, related to that, the acceptance of electronic certificate of pharmaceutical products, the CPPs, without the need of legalization can significantly simplify the regulatory processes as well, particularly leveraging the reliance process. Alternative mechanisms can also be employed to simplify regulatory complexities. One of them shared here in the slide is the expansion of the use of post-approval change management protocols, the PACMPs, which is a regulatory tool that provides predictability and transparency of the requirements needed to implement a change, and also the adherence to standards set by organizations such as the PICS, the Pharmaceutical Inspection Corporation Scheme, and fostering cooperation in GMP inspections can further enhance the regulatory simplification. So, also glad to hear from Fanny, the mutual recognition of the GMP certifications from El Salvador, and this believes to I believe to be a great way, like to also simplify the regulatory processes. Okay, so with that, that was my last slide. I hope that I could give a little bit of a perspective from the industry on the complexities when we deal with the global submissions, especially in the post-approval space. And I think that we are going to be moving to questions or the panel.
Tatiana, thank you very, very much. That was very detailed and very practical. I've never seen that kind of a comparison between WHO and EMA, and I thought that was illustrative. A couple of topics have come up, and so we have a few minutes just to bounce back and forth amongst ourselves, and maybe we can bring everybody together here. Tatiana, I'll just start with you. You were talking about these national requirements that go beyond the core dossier. And do you think that these diverse national requirements occur because of maybe less attention to global standards? Or do you think that there's some other reason why these divergences occur, which, as you mentioned, complicate the situation?
Yeah, no, thanks, Larry, for the question. And I think there are a lot of different nuances that can play a role in there, right? And as I mentioned in my presentation, I think it depends on the framework that is established by each one of the countries in regards to the requirements, and also the regulatory pathways and what is expected to prove the industry has the information to support scientifically the change that is being proposed. So all these initiatives to seek for convergence and to harmonize are highly beneficial, right, for all the patients worldwide. So really looking into like who is the final consumer of the medicines is the patient. So we want the patients to be quicker, faster, getting them reaching them. So these requirements historically they may be coming in a different way for the different countries, but I think we are in a very good moment where like regulators are talking and seeking for a better convergence.
I understand. Marie, you were talking about the alignment with the global benchmarking tool, the GBT, and how important that is. And I cannot remember, maybe you can fill us in. Within the GBT, are there sub-indicators that focus on aspects of what we might call good submission practices? In other words, how an agency interacts with a sponsor to be sure that the submission is a quality one that will meet the agency's need? Is that part of the assessment process?
Definitely. I hope you can hear me. Yes. So yes, definitely. So the global benchmarking tool cover all the regulatory functions, and for the regulatory functions such as marketing authorization or clinical trials, it covers all the activities in terms of reviewing, for example, the application. And also there are a lot of indicators in the different function regarding reliance. So if we look at the regulatory function of marketing authorization or clinical trials or inspection, there are some specific indicators for reliance in all these regulatory functions. So all the guidance and the tool for assessment are all linked, and in terms of review as well. Thank you.
Fascinating. So I have one more question, then Mario, you can jump in. But for Fanny, Fanny, I was very impressed, I think, as we all were, with the dramatic decrease in time required when the implementation of the various reliance pathways were put in place, the mutual recognition. We've heard from some agencies that there's reluctance to take up reliance amongst the staff, and yet it seems like there was an immediate improvement, which suggests that people bought into the process and like that. So two questions is, one, how did you accommodate the needs of all of the reviewers to move to this process? And secondly, do you think that having that validation step up front was part of the good submission practices? In other words, that said, okay, if we don't have a good submission, we're just going to push it back. And that means that we're focusing in on the really quality submissions that have everything in place.
Okay, Larry. Hi. Hi again. Yes, for the first question, we try to make channels for the technicians that are in the part of evaluate the dossier. So we try to put everyone in one specific channel according of everyone experience, and in that channel they receive different webinars, workshops. They receive different or everything that you can imagine for try to make an experience in each path. In each path is different for products. That's the way that we align the different channels. So we have one channel only for one specific brand of kind of products. And then we also did the other part. We did webinars, only webinars for the regulated part, to be able to promote the reliance part. And we put a date to start, and it was like, this date is the one that we'll start, and we are going with this. So that was the most important thing. It was to be able to put this information in the hands of the technicians and involve all the technicians in the process to they feel that they are part of this important activity. And the second, it was put the date and start. And sorry, I forgot the second question, Larry.
Yeah, so the second question had to do with the validation step, and that was part of the good submission practices. And did that help you then identify those dossiers that should be sent back for additional information so that you could focus on those that were complete submissions?
Yes, with the help of IT, of the National Regulatory Agency, we have a pretty friendly platform that review all the steps, and it's a check mark in all the steps, and it's a quick review. And if the part it's on, it's going to, in the second process, IT makes an very friendly platform for us. And when we have that checklist that it's going, it's making easier and smooth the process. If one document or one part is missing or is incomplete or it's not in the correct language, or it's not in the not had translation or approval of the stamps or whatever, it's going to be reviewed, and it's going to be in the other path of observation. And yes, in that part, we have the help of IT to review and make the process more smoothly for us.
Wow, that's fascinating. Excellent. I'll turn it back to our speakers just for a minute, Mario, just to see if Tatiana or Fanny or Marie have any reflections or thoughts that they'd like to to think about and share with us?
I've got a quick one. I think it was very interesting from the presentation from Tatiana in terms of post-authorization changes management. I think it's the next level. I think we did a survey in the context of the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Program, the RPRP, that meets in the margin of ICH a few years back, maybe 3-4 years ago. And we could see that reliance was used a lot in terms of initial authorization, was used a lot for good practices, so good manufacturing practices inspection, good clinical practice inspection. But really now we can see that there is a lot of movement, and I think it's also linked to the experience during the COVID-19, the pandemic response in terms of managing the vaccine, in terms of using reliance for post-authorization and for the product life cycle. And I think this is very exciting. We see a lot of pilots. There is a pilot under the ICPA, the International Conference for Medicine Regulatory Authorities, and some also industry-led pilots in terms of trying to use reliance and trying to use the same principle of having a reference authority for the change, and try to have maybe a set of 40 or 50 regulatory authorities that can benefit or use, if they wish to, the assessment of these major post-authorization changes. And I think this can clearly change the picture and change the future of life cycle, because we know that it's a lot of workload for both the industry and the regulators.
Tatiana, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, no, I'm just very glad to hear that, and happy to hear that there's this movement right towards the post approval, because I think that the framework can be probably more complex, right? Because you have so many different ways to file changes, and like the way to how health authorities are reviewing those changes, and the application of reliance approaches for this space and the post approval is really critical, right? For us to continue to improve the products, the quality, and like the new technologies that are coming to our way, and how these are reflected in a quicker manner to the patient. So very glad to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mario, do you have any reflections?
Yeah, well, it was fascinating, but I would like to talk about some common. On one part, Fanny mentioned the stressing that reliance is not a lesser kind of regulation, and I think it's important because it seems like reliance, the name has no meaning, but behind reliance is trust. And sometimes that is forgotten, and sometimes that leads to these complexities or lack of predictability, asking for things. So it seems so basic to mention how trust, it's what it's behind reliance. And so, and you don't have to be equal in regulation, but you are trusting the way the other one did it. So, and I think that was very good on what Fanny said, and it's perfectly consistent with all the regulatory practices and good review practices that Marie mentioned. And from a different point of view, I thought it was. We need to stress the trust. I mean, it seems like reliance is a name, has become for some agencies just a name, but reliance it's trust, and so that's why it seems that they want reliance, but not always trusting. So I don't know. I think that's
Well,
my comment. Yeah.
thanks for that reflection. And I think it's a theme that we saw all during last year with regard to these webinars, and we continue to build and say, how do we bring alignment and based on trust to all of these processes, including what we talked about today, a submission process. Well, I want to thank all of our presenters today. Wonderful, wonderful. So many good insights. As always, this has just been very illuminating. And Mario and I appreciate what you present. I know he and I always learn something at these meetings. So why don't we do a little summary of some of the practical things that came out of today's session. So a few takeaways. If you're watching or listening in one of the recordings, Here are some things that you can do based on what we learned today. So first, you should promote the importance of trust in submitting the dossier. And this implies trusting the regulatory agency, but also being sure that you have a complete documentation. We talked about this, the verification steps, and being sure that you have conversations that ensure that you've got a good quality dossier. Next, that regulators and the manufacturer should be encouraged to follow and use guidances, right? So we should revert to these guidances because a lot of thought have gone into them. And where there are divergences, there should be good scientific reasons for why there are divergences and why there should be a request for additional information. And lastly, we should think about ways to apply and reinforce the importance of simplifying regulatory processes, right? So when you're going through your process, ask yourself, ask your company, ask your organization, is there something that I can do to simplify what I'm doing here? How can I do that? Should it involve a conversation between my company and an agency? Maybe there's a simpler way, a more streamlined way of doing things. Wow. Well, very, very good. So remember that a recording of this session is going to be available shortly on the FR Path website. And we're sure that you'll be able to use these suggestions that you've just seen and the observations from today in your practical day-to-day activities. Just a heads up, if you want to mark your calendar, the next webinar in this series will be on Tuesday, May 7th. We'll be talking about a very important topic, product sameness and risk assessment, product sameness and risk assessment. So remember to check out the resources at the frpath.org website. We will have a registration link there up in shortly. So once again, Mario and I would like to have thank you all. A special thank you to our guests, Fanny, Marie, and Tatiana for their insights today. Mario and I thank you for your interest and your participation. All our best until we meet again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.